What if the real reason avoidant people pull back has almost nothing to do with you and everything to do with what registers as safe inside their own nervous system? Let me tell you something most people don't figure out until it's already too late, until the whole thing has already fallen apart in their hands. You probably think you understand avoidant people. You probably believe you already know why they retreat, why they go quiet, why they suddenly turn cold the second things start feeling real or deep. But honestly, you don't. Not fully. Not in the way that actually matters. Because almost everything you've picked up about avoidant behavior only covers half the picture, and most of what you assume they want from love is probably wrong. And if you don't genuinely understand what I'm about to walk you through, you'll keep repeating the exact same painful cycle over and over. You get close, they withdraw, you panic, the connection falls apart, and you're left standing there, wondering what went wrong. Here's the piece almost nobody explains. Avoidant people aren't running away from love itself. They're running from whatever doesn't feel safe to their system. That's an enormous distinction. And the real reason so many people lose an avoidant partner comes down to something surprisingly simple. They never learn the rare qualities that actually draw an avoidant person in. Not the qualities you assume matter. Not the things you've been desperately offering them this whole time. I'm talking about traits almost nobody practices anymore. Traits that make an avoidant person stop, exhale, and think, wait, this feels different. If you've ever watched someone slowly drift away from you, if you've ever been told you're too emotional or too intense, if you've ever felt like no matter what you did, it was never quite enough, if you've ever questioned your entire sense of worth because someone kept slipping just out of your reach, then this is something you can't afford to skip past. Because the moment you understand the traits avoidant people genuinely value, everything shifts. Your confidence shifts. Your relationships shift. The way you carry yourself through the world shifts. So take a moment, settle in, and really pay attention, because once you hear what's coming next, you'll never look at avoidant behavior the same way again. Emotional groundedness means staying connected to yourself when someone pulls away without chasing, panicking, or abandoning your own needs. Avoidant people often feel safer with someone who responds to distance with calm confidence rather than pressure, because it shows that closeness can exist without emotional chaos. Think back to a moment when someone you cared about pulled away, and instead of grounding yourself, you reacted purely from fear. You sent that extra text, you over-explained yourself, you apologized for things that weren't even your fault, you tried to restart the conversation, you chased after the closeness that felt like it was slipping away. And the harder you chased, the further they drifted, not because you weren't good enough, and not because you made some catastrophic mistake, but because your reaction confirmed the exact belief the avoidant person has carried their entire life, that intimacy equals pressure, and pressure equals danger. Now picture that same moment, except this time, you respond from a grounded place. You feel the fear rise, but you don't act on it. You give them space without abandoning your own sense of worth. You don't punish them. You don't spiral. You don't try to force closeness back into existence. You stay steady. You stay open. You stay warm. That kind of emotional steadiness hits an avoidant person like a shockwave because it completely dismantles the story they've told themselves their entire lives, that closeness always ends in chaos. When they pull back and nothing explodes, when you remain balanced and composed, it creates a small crack in their emotional armor. That's exactly what groundedness does. It communicates safety. And emotional safety is the one thing avoidant people never learned how to ask for, even though they desperately need it. When you stay centered, they slowly begin to trust that closeness with you won't pull them under. They start to believe that connection doesn't have to equal chaos. They begin to feel like intimacy is something they can actually survive, not something they need to escape. None of this means you ignore your own needs. It means you express them from a grounded place. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of collapsing into fear, you stand firmly in your truth. Instead of demanding reassurance, you offer clarity. Something like, I care about what we have. I'm here. I'm ready to talk whenever you're ready, and I'm not going to lose myself just because things feel uncomfortable. That kind of energy is magnetic, not just to avoidant people, but to almost anyone, because it radiates genuine self-respect. It shows maturity. It shows emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is something people feel, even when it's never spoken aloud. It reveals a kind of quiet resilience that someone who has spent their life keeping others at arm's length can't help but notice. People with avoidant tendencies, who move through relationships maintaining careful distance, can't help but see the contrast when you stay calm and centered. You show them their distance doesn't break you. You show them that emotions don't have to explode into chaos. You show them that closeness doesn't have to trigger panic or survival mode. And in that moment, you become someone they can genuinely trust, maybe in a way they've never trusted anyone before. That trust becomes the foundation everything else can grow from. There's something incredibly powerful about a person who can hold their own emotional space without punishing someone, without pushing for closeness, and without trying to pull someone out of their need for breathing room. It's genuinely rare these days. Most people only know two reactions: cling tightly or shut down completely. They either overwhelm the bond with fear and worry, or they retreat into themselves to avoid feeling vulnerable at all. But the rare person who stands steady in the middle, who stays connected without chasing, and stays grounded without turning cold, becomes unforgettable to an avoidant partner. Because avoidant people expect extremes. They're used to reactions that scare them off. When they pull back, they anticipate anger, guilt trips, emotional storms, or the silent treatment as punishment for not showing up the way someone wanted. Their entire life has taught them to brace for consequences. Every time they move closer or further away, they're bracing for someone else's emotional explosion. Closeness has always come bundled with demands, pressure, and emotional weight they feel unequipped to carry. So they step back to avoid disappointing someone or to avoid getting hurt themselves. But everything shifts the moment they meet someone who can maintain their own balance, someone who doesn't crumble, doesn't chase, doesn't wield silence as a weapon, and doesn't guilt-trip them for needing space. That kind of steadiness is a completely new experience for them. Picture this. They take a small step back, and instead of pressure, they feel calm presence radiating from you. You don't crowd them. You don't run away. You don't punish them through withdrawal. You don't make them feel like they've failed simply by needing space. You stay centered. You stay warm. You stay open. That calm balance creates a feeling inside them they almost never get to experience: relief. Because for once, they're not responsible for carrying someone else's emotions on their shoulders. They don't feel like they're disappointing you. They don't feel trapped. They don't feel like the entire relationship hinges on their next move. What they feel instead is respect. And that respect functions like pure oxygen to them. When you give them room without withdrawing your own energy from the connection, what you're really saying is, I'm here and I'm okay. That message reaches the parts of them that fear being swallowed whole or controlled. It dissolves the fear of being consumed and replaces it with a sense of choice. Avoidant people need choice the way human beings need air. They need to feel like closeness is something they can move toward on their own terms, not something being pushed onto them. When you hold your own space with confidence, you create the room for them to approach in their own time. But this is exactly where a lot of people misunderstand the whole process. They assume giving an avoidant person space means disappearing entirely, going cold, acting distant, or pretending indifference. That isn't holding space. That's emotional abandonment. It's a reaction, not a conscious choice, and avoidant people feel that difference sharply. When you go cold, they feel judged. When you go silent, they feel punished. When you strip away your warmth, they feel rejected, and all of it reinforces their deepest belief that they're safer alone. Holding your own space means something entirely different. It means staying emotionally available without demanding anything in return. It means keeping your warmth intact. It means not shrinking back, not over-explaining, not scrambling to fix the discomfort. It means remaining fully yourself without pushing for closeness. You keep living your life, staying grounded, understanding that your worth isn't determined by how close or far someone else happens to be. Your steadiness becomes something like a lighthouse they can return to once the storm inside them settles. And you should never underestimate how powerful that actually is. Avoidant people almost never have a truly safe place to land. They're used to dealing with two kinds of people: those who treat their need for space as a personal insult, and those who try to fill that space with pressure, questions, and emotional weight. Someone who stands firmly rooted in their own center is a rarity. Someone who respects the avoidant person's rhythm while still maintaining their own emotional balance is almost impossible to find. And because it's so rare, avoidant people notice it right away. Here's something worth understanding. People who can hold their own space are emotionally secure. They aren't operating from fear. They aren't trying to control the connection. They aren't clinging to it out of a need for reassurance. They know exactly who they are. They understand that a pause doesn't equal rejection. They understand that someone needing room doesn't mean the relationship is collapsing. And avoidant people find that kind of confidence deeply calming because it means they don't have to protect you from their own emotional rhythm. Holding your own space teaches an avoidant person something they've never truly learned. That connection doesn't have to be a tug of war. It doesn't have to be a chase. It doesn't have to be a battle for control. It can simply be two people standing in their own truth, communicating honestly, showing up as themselves, and giving each other enough room to breathe. That kind of dynamic is healing for avoidant people. It reshapes how they understand intimacy, shifting it from something threatening into something manageable and safe. And something shifts inside you too once you learn how to do this. You stop living in constant reaction mode. You stop trying to fix every uncomfortable emotion. You stop abandoning yourself just to keep a connection alive. You start trusting your own capacity to handle uncertainty. You start valuing your own sense of calm. And that produces a quiet power that an avoidant person can feel even when you say nothing at all. They notice your steadiness. They notice you aren't forcing anything. They notice you aren't filling silence with fear or lengthy explanations. They notice you aren't turning their need for space into a crisis. And that steadiness becomes a soft, quiet magnet, drawing them closer in a way that feels natural and safe because you no longer represent another emotional burden they have to manage. You become someone they can breathe around, someone they can return to without fear, someone whose presence feels like freedom instead of obligation. The truth is, the ability to hold your own space without punishing or pressuring someone is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity there is. It means you've learned to regulate yourself. It means you can see another person as separate from your own emotional triggers. It means you can love without controlling, connect without spiraling into panic, and stay steady even when uncertainty shows up. Avoidant people value this more than they could ever fully explain, because it offers them something rare, genuine safety with another human being, and safety is always the first doorway to real closeness. When I say avoidant people are drawn to those whose self-worth isn't decided by the avoidant person's behavior, I mean something far deeper than ordinary confidence. I mean the rare individual who doesn't hand over their emotional center just because someone becomes distant, quiet, or inconsistent. That kind of strength hits an avoidant person like a shock, because they've spent their entire life functioning as the emotional thermostat for everyone they've been close to. Most people react to their distance as though it's a statement about their own worth. They panic, they fear the worst, they get angry, they collapse into guilt or start assigning blame. They wrap their entire identity around the avoidant person's attention, and the moment that attention shifts even slightly, they fall apart. So when an avoidant person meets someone who doesn't collapse, someone who doesn't spin fearful stories, someone who doesn't chase or fall apart, it breaks their entire emotional pattern. It interrupts a script they've been running for years. The avoidant person expects you to take it personally. They expect you to assume the worst. They expect you to translate their silence into rejection. But someone who knows their own worth doesn't do that. They don't spiral. They don't overthink. They understand something most people never learn, that someone else's behavior is information about that person, not proof of your own value. Imagine how soothing that is for someone who has lived with the fear that closeness will pull them under. When they step back and you don't panic, when you don't make it about your own worth, you're showing them something powerful. You're showing them that you don't depend on their approval to remain steady. You're showing them you're not asking them to carry your emotional weight. You're showing them you're not expecting them to regulate your feelings for you. That's deeply relieving for an avoidant person, because their greatest fear is disappointing someone who leans on them too heavily emotionally. They don't want to hurt you. They don't want to fail you. They don't want to feel like your emotional world collapses the moment they need a bit of solitude. That kind of pressure is more than they can carry, and the moment they sense it, they retreat. But a self-assured person changes the entire equation. You become someone they can respect because you respect yourself. You become someone they can trust because you don't use the relationship to fill some void inside you. You become someone they can approach without fear because you don't make them responsible for your happiness. That kind of emotional energy is rare. It comes from real inner stability, not coldness, not pride, but genuine strength. It's the kind of strength that says, I know who I am. I know what I deserve. I want connection, but I don't need you to be perfect for me to feel okay. That energy is powerful because avoidant people aren't chasing perfection. They're searching for safety. They want someone who can stay rooted even when intimacy starts to feel difficult. When your self-worth doesn't shake with their movements, you send a wordless message, I choose you, but I don't collapse for you. That message changes everything. It helps the avoidant person stay close instead of running, because now closeness isn't a demand. Your presence no longer requires them to sacrifice their autonomy. You're not asking them to hold your emotional world together. You're giving them the freedom to simply be themselves, without expecting them to carry your emotional weight. And for someone who's spent their whole life afraid of emotional responsibility, that freedom is often the very first time intimacy has ever felt safe. The moment they pull away, most people become tense or uneasy. And the more uneasy the other person feels, the more flooded and overwhelmed the avoidant partner begins to feel in return. This quietly confirms their long-held belief that closeness always turns into emotional pressure. But when they meet the rare kind of person who doesn't respond with fear, panic, or neediness, something inside them shifts. It interrupts a pattern they've repeated for years. It makes them pause. It makes them question their automatic reactions. They begin to notice that something about this particular connection feels different. They slowly start to understand that maybe closeness doesn't always have to feel tight or suffocating, that maybe it can feel steady, maybe it can feel calm. Your steady sense of self-worth becomes something grounding for them. Even when things feel uncertain, even when communication slows down, even when the emotional landscape gets murky or confusing, you don't collapse into fear. You don't shrink into insecurity. You don't explode into panic. You stay connected to yourself. You stay steady. You stay clear. You remain rooted in who you are. And that consistency creates the emotional space for the avoidant person to eventually come back, not because they feel pushed or pressured, but because they genuinely feel safe in your presence. This is where the real shift begins. When your sense of worth isn't shaken by their distance or silence, when you refuse to let their rhythm dictate your value, the avoidant person starts to feel like they can finally show who they really are. They feel like they can be imperfect, uncertain, human. They feel like they can breathe without you assuming every pause is a sign of abandonment. For the first time, they experience freedom instead of pressure. And that freedom is exactly what allows them to slowly step toward you, rather than instinctively stepping away. When you stop negotiating your worth based on how much closeness they can offer in any given moment, you become a solid anchor point inside their otherwise chaotic inner world. You become someone who doesn't get pulled apart by their distance, someone who doesn't crumble when communication slows, someone who doesn't beg, chase, or plead for reassurance, someone who doesn't let fear dictate the entire connection. And a person like that becomes unforgettable to an avoidant partner because you're offering them something they didn't even realize they needed, a connection that doesn't threaten to swallow them whole. Someone who stands firmly in themselves gives the avoidant person room to exist without feeling like the relationship has to carry the full weight of their identity. That's what makes them feel safe enough to stay instead of running. That's what gives them room to grow. That's what builds real trust. Something almost transformative happens when an avoidant person meets someone who isn't trying to cure them, repair them, or decode their every small reaction. Someone who doesn't treat them like a puzzle that needs solving before anyone can feel secure. Someone who doesn't quietly carry the belief that if I can just get them to open up more, if I can just pull them a little closer, if I can just get them to share their past, then finally they'll become the partner I've been hoping for. Avoidant people sense that hidden agenda almost instantly because they've spent so much of their lives feeling misunderstood. The moment they sense someone trying to shape them into a version that fits that person's own need for security, they pull back, not because they don't care, but because pressure disguised as help feels like emotional suffocation to them. That internal alarm goes off, warning them this isn't a safe space. But when they encounter the rare person who allows them to simply exist as they are, someone who doesn't poke or push, someone who doesn't dig through their emotional world like an amateur therapist, someone who doesn't demand honesty on some imposed schedule, something almost unbelievable happens for them. They feel genuinely accepted. Real acceptance. Not the kind where someone tolerates them on the surface while quietly trying to fix them behind the scenes. Not the kind where someone pretends to accept them while secretly cataloging every emotional slip. This is acceptance that says, you get to be exactly who you honestly are. I'm not here to rush your process. I'm not your repair project. I don't see you as something broken. That level of acceptance is genuinely rare, and avoidant people feel it deep in their bodies. Their entire nervous system relaxes in a way they never thought possible. They stop bracing for the moment you'll try to push past their boundaries. They stop mentally preparing their exit route. They stop bracing for emotional ambushes disguised as ordinary conversation. For the first time, they can simply exist without being dragged into emotional depths they aren't ready for. They can finally breathe without fear. It isn't that avoidant people don't want intimacy or connection. It isn't that they don't want depth or closeness. They genuinely do want those things. They simply want them delivered at a pace their nervous system can actually handle. They want time to warm up. They want to feel safe enough before opening up. They want emotional closeness to be something they choose for themselves, not something forced onto them by someone else's fear. Most people mistake their pacing for emotional unavailability, but it isn't a lack of feeling. It's a matter of timing. When you let an avoidant person move at their own natural rhythm, something remarkable happens. They open up more freely. They share more willingly. They express emotions they'd never reveal if they felt pushed or pressured. The key difference is that this openness comes from them, not from force. Choice is the foundation of intimacy for an avoidant person. When closeness becomes something they choose instead of something demanded of them, everything transforms. They become more engaged. They become more honest. They become more genuinely connected. Think about how often avoidant people have been judged throughout their lives, labeled too cold, too distant, too slow to open up, too private, too confusing, too independent, too hard to understand. They've heard these criticisms from partners, from friends, even from family. So when someone finally shows up who isn't trying to change them or rework their personality, they feel a kind of safety they rarely get to experience. You stop being a threat to their independence. You stop being someone they feel they have to guard themselves against. You become someone who sees them as a person with a different rhythm, rather than as someone fundamentally broken. Here's something most people overlook. Avoidant people crave emotional safety even more than they crave closeness. And acceptance is safety. Acceptance doesn't demand. Acceptance doesn't force. Acceptance doesn't drag someone into emotional waters they aren't ready to swim in. Acceptance simply says, I see you exactly as you are. I hear you. I understand your pace. I'm here for connection, not for control. Once an avoidant person senses that from you, they stop hiding. They stop holding back. They stop bracing for the moment they'll inevitably disappoint you emotionally. Instead, they begin to reveal sides of themselves that almost no one else has ever witnessed. Not because you forced it out of them, but because they finally feel free enough to show it. And here's the strange, beautiful truth underneath all of this. When you stop trying to fix them, they actually grow faster, not because you demanded change, but because you created an emotional environment where growth could unfold naturally. Your acceptance becomes the spacious room they need to expand into. Your patience becomes the quiet signal that it's safe to step forward. Your calmness becomes the space where their vulnerability finally wakes up. Most people assume pushing creates closeness, but with avoidant people, pressure creates distance, while acceptance creates connection. The more you try to decode them, the more they close off. The more you simply let them be, the more they show you. The more you try to reshape their emotions, the more they shut down. The more you honor their pace, the more trust they extend. Avoidant people know instantly when someone treats them like a project to fix. They feel it in their bones. But they also recognize, just as instantly, when someone sees them as a full, complex human being, complete with their fears, their contradictions, and their careful, gradual steps forward. And that is the person they eventually feel safe enough to love deeply. Because acceptance, not pressure, is what reaches their heart. It's what allows them to finally stay. It's what allows them to choose closeness instead of running from it.